What is an atheist? An atheist believes that there either is no God, or the person says that he or she lacks the belief in God. So they claim that there's not enough evidence to support God. And we believe, as Christians, that we have an abundance of evidence in nature and in the cosmos to support the existence of God. But beside that, beside the idea of in nature and in the cosmos, which would show us that there is a divine presence, we believe that there is mighty support for Jesus' resurrection. And that through that evidence, we can be confident in our beliefs. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to present a few of the opinions of some of the dominant atheists right now on YouTube and in society. And I'm going to start off with Richard Dawkins. And so Richard Dawkins is an atheist who's one of the new atheists. In fact, he's considered a member of the Four Horsemen. So Richard Dawkins has achieved some notoriety among atheists. Many of them appreciate his words. And so let's start with his words so you can get an idea of the atheist mentality that guides some atheists in the atheist community. Now, this is not to say that all atheists believe as Richard Dawkins believes in this dogmatic materialism. However, some atheists do endorse this philosophy. And so as we look at this, let's just think about how this could serve as a guiding principle in one's life if you actually took these words seriously. So here we go. Let's take a look at what Richard Dawkins has to say. He says, and I'll quote, "The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive. Many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." Now, let's think about what it would mean to live under this sort of philosophy. You'll notice, interestingly, that he calls attention to the importance of justice, saying there's no justice in this universe. So he has undermined his own philosophy because, of course, people seek justice. You can't find a human on this planet in his or her right mind who does not believe that justice is an honorary pursuit. An honorable pursuit, I should say. You will not find one who believes that. In fact, we all call on certain beliefs. Numerous studies have indicated that benevolence is at the top of the hierarchy as far as what humans tend to value. I can speak to that from Shalom Schwartz and also from the moral foundations theory. And the latter comes from an atheist, Jonathan Haidt. And so this idea that caring is highly valued by humans across the planet speaks to a question of where exactly did this come from? If we're just in a universe of blind, pitiless indifference, such beliefs are arbitrary, ridiculous. Notions of equity and of equality, equality of opportunities, of course, and of justice, and of the ideas that we want to seek love, opportunity for all. We've got a lot of these ideas that life is valuable. Where does this come from in a universe of blind, pitiless indifference? So I've got a couple of studies that point that out, but there are others. There are studies from places like the globe that have indicated that the levels of humane orientation vary across the world. However, people know innately almost that there is a moral ought to be benevolent, to seek what they call humane orientation. Now, where did this come from in a universe of blind, pitiless indifference? It makes no sense. It's nonsensical. It's something that people would craft in their minds, according to the atheist, under the Richard Dawkins sense of morality. And so while I'm just going to take a quick break to say hi to people in the chat, I've got John taking back Eden. Welcome. Charlie Reed, welcome. So we've got some wonderful people in the chat. So let's keep going down. So we're going to talk about some other quotations that I found from some atheists. And then at the end, I'm going to get to 7 specific issues and notions that atheists have that are unfortunately horribly incorrect. And so we're going to debunk these notions today. So here's Aaron Ra. Aaron Ra has made a name for himself as an atheist YouTuber. And so he says, for Jesus' resurrection to be evidence, it would first have to be a fact. It's not, so it isn't. See how simple he debunks it? He just simply says it's not with his hand waving. Of course, I'm going to provide some evidence that yes, it is. Godless Liz. Godless Liz says humans invent monsters, write fairy tales, pass down folklore, enjoy storytelling, write fiction books and movies, start rumors and spread lies to hurt others, suffer from delusions and hallucinations via mental illness or drugs. But sure, the Bible is totally non-fiction. This little tweet got 475 likes. What's interesting about this is it's a non sequitur. The Bible has nothing to do with what humans invent in their minds. The Bible has something to do with what humans would develop as a moral code. So the Bible has given us a moral code through the exemplar, our moral exemplar of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ set for us exactly what it means to be a human. The idea of sacrificing himself for the sake of humanity. We were bound to our sin, bound to this earth, and the only way to redemption would be to have a person sacrifice himself. But of course, the person himself sacrificing for our sins could not be one who had sinned. Therefore, no human is capable of doing this. However, Jesus, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's from the first part of John. And you'll also see it in Revelation. God spoke the world into existence. And so Jesus, as the blemish-free Passover lamb, took on the sins for the rest of salvation, for the rest of the earth, and gave us salvation. And we can thank him for that. The Bible is the most widely read book in the world. It's translated into more languages, and it's sold more books than any other book on the planet. How is it possible that an iterant, rather obscure Jewish carpenter in the ancient Near East 2,000 years ago, before television, before the internet, before any sort of widespread news, how is it possible that he could suddenly become the most talked about person in the entire history of the planet? How is that possible? An obscure Jewish carpenter in a rather impoverished family in an obscure little place in the ancient Near East. Think about that. Gamaliel in Acts 5 was able to answer that question. He said to the other Pharisees who had arrested Peter and another apostle, he said, don't hold them, because if their following is anything like the other two, and he cited two people, I believe it was Judas of Galilee and Theudas. He said, if his following is anything like that, if the following is anything like that of Jesus, then it'll just die out. However, if it's of God, you will not be able to stop these men. So by 313, when Constantine legalized Christianity finally, after almost 300 years of persecutions, torture, crucifixions, all kinds of horrific ends in sporadic ways, sporadic times through the early Christian history, he put an end to all of that. But by that time, according to Jeffrey Waru, and about 40 other global historians in modern times, they realized that between 5 and 6 million people were worshiping Jesus before given legal protections. And so that is something that's pretty awesome. So let's go to the next one. Seth Andrews, here's what he said. I think we should ask 50 Christian apologists to sit in the same room and discuss the basics of their religion: young earth creation, biblical inerrancy, baptism, eternal security, speaking in tongues, the properties of miracles, hell, etc. And we should televise it. #chaos. Okay, so the idea that is underlying assumption here is that people have to come to an agreement for something to be true. However, we could sit 50 Americans in any sort of position, in any walk of life together and try to get people to agree on something. You could sit a husband and a wife together and try to get them to agree on something, and they might disagree. It doesn't mean that what they are agreeing on or disagreeing on represents the truth. This idea is an epistemological error. He is saying how you come to the belief speaks to whether or not it's true. However, that's faulty. What he should be looking at is the ontological truth behind it. The ontological position is Christianity true? Okay, does Jesus as divine exist? Do we have a divine existence in Jesus? This is an ontological position. It doesn't matter whether or not Johnny understands it. It doesn't matter how Johnny comes to that belief. The position itself is ontologically true. So this sort of argumentation from Seth Andrews is fallacious, unfortunately. Sadly, this is the kind of fallacious argument that we witness periodically in the atheist community. People like Seth Andrews have made a name for himself, standing up on a stage in front of a number of other atheists and calling on Satan to light him on fire, essentially, saying that Satan could strike him dead right now, that he has no fear of Satan. Others in the crowd who had some Christian roots actually cringed when they saw this move. But it was Seth's way of trying to sort of puff up his existence and pretend that he is of some sort of importance and that he is not fearful of Satan. We'll see. Let's go. So Aaron Ra, he continues, there's no point debating over fictional characters in your favorite fantasy, but I debate your assumption of objective morality. Objective morality. Well, we're going to get to that one in just a moment. The interesting thing about objective morality is we're saying that we have objective moral standards and duties to do what's right. The person arguing against that says that the moral standards and duties that we have are merely subjective, merely opinions, merely something that we've crafted in our own minds, and hopefully we can all come to an agreement upon. However, that's not the case. That's not truly the case, because if you realize that humanity lives by the objective moral standards to do what's right, tell the truth, for example, we're bound to tell the truth. We're bound not to steal, not to kill, not to lie. We're bound to try to be benevolent. We have certain moral oughts, moral duties. Even if we don't follow them, we know they're there. And that's evident in the Globe study, for example. We have the moral duty in the Globe study. We have the moral ought. They actually distinguish ought from is. And they found that every single country, as I mentioned before, the moral ought was higher than the moral is. In other words, people realized that they ought to be kind to their neighbors, whether or not they were kind to their neighbors. They realized that there was a moral imperative there. And this moral imperative goes across the globe, and it transcends populations, it transcends cultures, and it transcends eras. Therefore, it must have a transcendent moral lawgiver that also goes beyond cultures, people, and eras. That speaks to God. God is our transcendent moral lawgiver, and he has imbued us with moral duties to do what's right and to treat our fellow humans in correct ways. He's let us know how that is. And when we go beyond that, when we don't treat our fellow humans in correct ways, we find our conscience acts out against us. Aaron Ra's conscience likely acts out against him. And so do the other people I've mentioned so far that we've gotten to thus far. So we can get to this next quote here from Ricky Gervais. So Ricky Gervais says, remember, we all die. If we all die, so do you. Now, the interesting thing is Ricky has constant conversations with a Twitter account called the Tweet of God. And so Ricky likes to go back and forth talking about God. Now, what he is doing here is he is putting God into his humanly sort of body and position. He is bringing God down to linear time as if he's one of us and not outside and transcendent to time. Ricky Gervais, unfortunately, is very sadly mistaken about God. His sort of views on God are equivalent to those of people like Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins seems to want to bring God down on his own level, thinking that who created God? He thinks the biggest question that you can ask is, who created the designer? If God created the universe, who created God? This is such a ridiculously low-level understanding of Christianity or even of God himself that it's almost laughable had it not be coming from some rather loud personalities in the atheist community. So here we go to the next one. And I want to say before I get to that, hi to people in the chat. So I see my friend Daniel Ray, Taking Back Eden, that's John. I see Joseph Turkett, Charlie Reed, Dr. Nose. So great people in here. So thank you so much for coming in. Naming a couple other tweets that I've found from atheists. So here's Paulia Gia. Paulia Gia says, when prayer is taken as a placebo in place of critical thinking, serious planning, and actual action, there is tremendous harm. You hear that? Prayer, tremendous harm. Prayer is a personally placating dopamine hit, like culpability morphine. Now, this assertion is going to be debunked in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to get to that, and I'm going to talk about the Templeton prayer study, and one of the reasons that atheists have been using that to try to pretend that prayer has no efficacy. They are unfortunately delusional in their assertions. So Franklin Graham says here, and this is what Paulia Gia decided to quote tweet. And just as prayer has helped us as a nation, it helps us as individuals. In fact, prayer is one of the few things in this world that hurts no one and sustains the spirit of millions. This is a quote from President Ronald Reagan in 1982 at the National Day of Prayer. Prayer and meditation have been shown to physically help humans. Prayer is something that's part of life. prayer and meditation, there are numerous studies that have found that these two forces can be very helpful to humans in maintaining their spirituality, maintaining their sanity, and all sorts of other great outcomes. However, a lot of people like to point to what they call the Templeton Prayer Study. And in the Templeton Prayer Study, what happened was somebody solicited a prayer study, and they said, let's get together a couple of groups. We're going to get together several groups of people, but we're going to have a couple of groups that people are praying for, and then we're going to have a control group that nobody is praying for. However, it doesn't work that way in a prayer study, because what happened was they sampled these groups who were in the hospital and about to undergo surgery. So you've got several groups of people who are about to undergo surgery, which could have been dangerous surgery. Interestingly, 95% or more in all of those groups believed that somebody was praying for them, that a loved one was praying for them. However, this study ignored that. They mentioned, yes, this is true, but then they also pointed out that they had set up their own group of people to pray for these people. There was a group of people who were going to pray for two of the groups, but not the third group. Okay, so there was a separate group. They didn't know the names of the people for whom they were praying. They didn't know any information about those people for whom they were praying, aside from the fact that they were about to undergo surgery. So these people who were removed from the hospital at a distance saying prayers were there. But also, of course, the loved ones, 95% or more of the people in this study in the hospital, including in the control group, believed that there were loved ones praying for them. So, of course, when they didn't find any statistically significant differences between the three groups, they attributed it to prayer doesn't work. But that's faulty attributions. Prayer studies don't work if you can't control for the prayers of loved ones, period. It's that simple. Okay, so when people try to use this as reasoning, it doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm not saying that Paulia Gia used this as reasoning, but he's trying to pretend that prayer doesn't work. Of course, there's many instances where prayer does work. A really fun one that I've showed people before is there were two people who somehow got caught in a riptide off the coast of Florida not too long ago. And these two people were just kids, got caught in a riptide. They were way off the coast, I believe, of St. Augustine. And one of them just started saying prayers, said, God, if you're real, show us. Just give us a sign. Just please save us, show us, let us know you're real. We're here to believe. We're praying. And not too long later, a boat with the name Amen came and rescued those two people. You can look that up. Just one example of many. Another example is Barbara Comiskey-Snyder. Barbara Comiskey-Snyder is a woman who was suffering from MS, very debilitating case. She was in a wheelchair. Her hands and feet were pretty much atrophied. She couldn't move. Her lungs were about to be destroyed. She couldn't see. People had given up on her. They were saying prayers for her through a radio station. Prayers, prayers, prayers. Her church was praying for her. Everyone was praying for her. They wanted her to live. They wanted a miracle. This is in the early 1980s, and this is in Illinois. Apparently what happened, or is Illinois or Indiana, I'm forgetting, but it was in the Midwest. But apparently what happened is after all of these prayers and all of this stuff, Barbara was in her bed, all crumpled up in a very debilitating position. People again had given up on her. And suddenly she heard the words, my child, get up and walk. Immediately, the atrophy started to disappear. She was able to jump out of bed and pretty much dance. Her family was shocked. She ended up walking down the aisle that day at her church because her church had a night service. She walked down the aisle to the cheers of other people in the church. Yes, prayer works. And we have millions of instances of it all around the world. There are studies being compiled right now in places such as China and Africa and other places where prayer is really taking off and Christianity has really ignited. We're seeing Christianity grow in many parts of the world, even though many people are being horrifically persecuted as Christians. We're seeing in the Muslim world, Christians are unfortunately given second-class citizenship. Many of them are tremendous heroes, despite horrific persecutions. And this takes us back to the apostles, but I'll get to that in just a moment. So I want to say as I go over here, thank you so much. Dr. Knows, I see your comment. So yes, we know about this prayer study, Taking Back Eden. Lee Strobel interviewed her. Yes, that's so true. And that's actually where one of the places where I first got the information about her, but I also got it from my friend Susan. Susan has been on my channel. You guys who are following me may have seen her in the chat. She goes by the handle SlamRN. She's a nurse. Years ago, she was sitting on her deathbed. People had pretty much given up on her and put her into hospice. Now, if you know about hospice, you know that is when somebody's at the final stages of life. And Susan had all of a sudden this distinct feeling that she was going to be given a second chance after many prayers. Susan's still around today, doing quite well, health-wise. And that is attributable directly to God. Sal's been on my channel, Sal Cordova. Sal also believes he's had some miracles in his life. My sister one time was caught in a riptide when she was a little kid. And all of a sudden she heard a female voice tell her how to swim with the tide, not to swim against it. This is when she was just a little kid. We were visiting Florida. We didn't know anything about riptides. And she was saved. She's still alive today. There are many, many instances. Go ask your friends. Talk to them. Now, here's what Tracy Harris and Matt Dillahunty. Now, these are two people who have a show. I guess Tracy stepped out of it, but Matt Dillahunty is still the head honcho on the show called The Atheist Experience. It's out of the atheist community of Austin. This is a 501c group that is being funded by, it's essentially they're not paying taxes. They complain about churches not paying taxes, but of course, many atheist organizations are also not paying taxes with tax exempt status based on nonprofit ideas. And so this is one of them. But anyway, beyond that, we're going beyond the tax exempt idea. Tracy Harris and Matt Dillahunty, it says here, crush a religious caller on the atheist experience. Humans are much more moral than the gods we created. Hashtag atheism. This is almost humorous because the idea that the atheist is doing right here is smuggling Christian morality and trying to claim it for themselves. One of the things that atheists have been doing lately is trying to claim a moral high ground. They're trying to claim that atheism has some sort of moral high ground over Christianity. For centuries, Christians have had the moral high ground, and atheists have not had the moral high ground because atheists don't believe that there is an objective moral lawgiver that holds people accountable externally, even if they're able to get away with things on this earth. Christianity does believe that. But Christians also are held accountable to rules that are laid out in the Bible. Under Jesus, under the new covenant, we're told that we need to love the Lord above all else and love our neighbors as ourselves. But we're also told how we're supposed to act in ways as far as treating our bodies. Our bodies are sacred vessels. We're told that we're supposed to act in certain ways sexually. We're told that we're supposed to act in certain ways as far as what we put into our bodies and what we give out of our bodies, what we say, what we do. All of those kinds of things are laid out for us. We're told in Genesis 1:27 that we're made in God's image. We're told that we're not supposed to destroy other humans. So this goes completely against the atheist notion that humans are no better if they're in the womb than some sort of animal. Our fetus is no better. A fetus is just a clump of cells. It hasn't been guaranteed personhood. Okay, life begins at conception. You ask any scientist to refute that, he won't. He or she will not do that because life, of course, does begin at conception. You can't argue against that. So what the atheist does, and also what many Christians, some Christians do too, there is a group called Catholics for Abortions. What these people do is they try to pretend that life either doesn't begin at conception or personhood isn't conferred until some magical time later. Some of them say, hey, personhood confers as soon as the baby's viable. Now it's a person. When that occurs exactly, precisely, we don't know. Is it at 20 weeks? Is it at 20 weeks and 1 hour? Who knows? Is it at 24 weeks? We don't know. But they're going to claim that so they can justify murdering that baby inside of them out of inconvenience. Just remember, turtle eggs and eagle eggs in the United States have more rights than unborn humans. And that's including unborn humans up to the day that the mother gives birth, okay? You can kill in some states. You are legally okayed to kill a baby up to the moment of birth in some places. In many places, most places actually, it's up to about 20 weeks. But the idea is that you can just go and have an abortion because the baby's inconvenient is pretty egregious. Take a look at what a baby looks like in an ultrasound at 16 weeks when many abortions do occur. Take a look at that baby, fully formed, little hands, little feet, cute little head, everything in that little baby, enough to tell if it's a boy or a girl. Okay, you can tell a lot of stuff at around 12, 13, 14, 15 weeks. And yet that's when many abortions do occur. And so what I'm trying to say is right around the same time when Roe v. Wade passed here in the United States in 1973, that gave people the legal right to have an abortion prior to viability, which they say is right around 20 weeks. At that same time, they also decided that they would criminalize people who were going to go after turtle eggs and eagle eggs. So the animals are given more rights than the humans. If you are to destroy today a turtle egg or an eagle egg, you could go to prison and be given a hefty fine. However, if you destroy a human egg, sometimes you're given a pat on the back by some of these atheists who claim the moral high ground. What is that? Think about that. It's warped mentality. Goes completely against what we know to be right. One of the reasons that we know this goes against what we know to be right is because people try to justify the killing of another human by pretending that other human is not human. They try to pretend it's just a clump of cells, or it's just a blob. It's non-human. It's just a fetus. It's the equivalent of an elephant fetus. I actually saw an atheist making that argument. Can you distinguish what this one is and this one is? You know, here's a picture of a little fetus, little teeny fetus at about 2 or 3 weeks. You can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference between that and so what? We know if given time, that little human is going to become somebody who could possibly make a huge impact on the world. And so to go destroy that baby, as 60 million mothers have done since, well, I shouldn't say 60 million mothers, because some of the mothers have had multiple abortions. So 60 million babies have been aborted since 1973 when Roe v. Wade was legalized. And this is supposedly the moral high ground. Think about that. That's pretty bad. Now here's Prophet Azad. He says, we'd be playing right into the apologists' hands if we only labored through the most detailed versions of their, quote, best work while letting them run the populist versions of their message unchecked all over the landscape. Okay, now this fellow had me blocked on Twitter after I interacted with him in a video on objective morality one time, interestingly enough. Now, if we do go through our information and we ask them to give us the best explanation for the information that we have coming from secular sources surrounding Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection, the best explanation we have is that he resurrected. I will give you some of those laid out facts in just a moment, but we've got a lot of good support for the resurrection. And if we didn't have the resurrection, Christianity doesn't exist. St. Paul said that. But we do. We've got plenty of evidence for the resurrection coming from inside the Bible, outside the Bible with church fathers, outside the Bible with secular hostile people. In fact, if I grouped what secular hostile sources have said, which I will do in a moment, if we ask for the best explanation for that information, the only explanation is, of course, that Jesus resurrected. Now, Paulia Gia says, as a former Christian, now this is a fellow who seems to have a pretty good view of himself, which the people who commented on this tweet pointed out. Seems to be a little bit elevated in the ego, but let's see if you guys agree with me. Maybe I'm wrong here. Tell me if I am. As a former Christian, my greatest contribution is to remain laser focused on my expertise there. But I am an anti-theist and support all efforts against religion in government everywhere. The need is obvious. Yes, the efforts for no religion in government have led to pro-abortion rules. Okay, no religion in government, no views on the value of human life have unfortunately been led to can go to nihilism. If we don't value human life, which is of course the anti-religion position, communists didn't value human life. Consider what happened in the last century under Pol Pot, Stalin, and Mao Zedong. These three people who were leading Cambodia, the USSR, and China respectively, ended up slaughtering about 120 million of their own citizens. And why did they do that? Well, many of them had the communist beliefs steeped in Marxism. Marx was a very well-known atheist, and everything underscoring all of Marxism is steeped in atheism. And of course, those three leaders led atheism. They believed in atheism to its logical outcomes, which means that you don't value human life. Communists don't value human life. The fact that some people are gravitating further and further to the left, younger kids are doing that. They seem to think socialism is a good idea. It's almost as if they haven't been given any sort of historical documentation of what happened in the last century under communism or what's going on in Venezuela. So be careful what you wish for. There are certain things and aspects of a socialist idea, like, for example, universal health care. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea of government ownership of the chief means of production, okay? Government control of the chief means of production. We saw that happening, of course, in those countries I mentioned. But I digress. So let's go to the next thing. So here is what the atheist notions are in a nutshell. The first thing they say, and let me see what we see right here. I'm just changing this really quickly to what I see here. So let me see. The first thing we see here is the atheist notions in a nutshell. Apologists don't know what they're talking about. Okay, now, of course, the atheists are saying something that they're refuting themselves, because, of course, an atheist who is trying to defend his or her point of view, which is exactly what all of these people are doing, is an apologist. The definition of apologist is merely one who defends his or her point of view. And so to say that apologists don't know what they're talking about, which is what some people have said, like Dr. Kip Davis, who responded to the video that I just made, the last video I made, he said something to the effect that we don't know what we're talking about. Well, sure, neither do you. If you say that we don't know what we're talking about, how can you possibly make a position that you do? Because you're also defending your position. So they're refuting themselves. The Bible is fiction. Now, that's a really interesting thing that sometimes I have heard, and I've heard a little bit alluded to in these tweets that I've shown you. But of course, ask an historian if the Bible is fiction. Ask somebody who's been an archaeologist, who's been digging up evidence in the ancient Near East. They go to the Bible to be able to figure out and put a timeline on events. Many of these people rely on the Bible for its historical value and its archaeological value. So if you try to pretend like it's fiction, you're ignoring what science is telling us, what the historians are telling us, what the archaeologists are telling us. You're ignoring all of that. It's ridiculous. Jesus didn't resurrect. Now that is a really amusing one. And so to get to that, I want to bring up another slide here. So let me just slide over here for 1 second to show you what we have from sources outside of the Bible that support Jesus' resurrection. So I don't know if you can see this. Let me see. I've got to just switch this off and switch it on. So hold on just a second. I want to say hi while I come back over here, though. So hi to all of you in the chat. So I see Charlie Reed and Taking Back, great to see you. Charlie Reed, Gary Priestley, he agrees with some of these. Josephus, yes, Josephus is one of our ancient support. So we've got Josephus and we have others. So let me just show you what we have here. So this particular slide is going to give you some extra biblical hostile support. So I ask you to take a look at the information on this slide and to give me what the best explanation is of these data, okay? So here's what we have. The first one, Jesus existed. Now this goes against people like Godless Engineer and Richard, what's his name? Richard I forgot the guy's name. Oh my gosh, I'll get back to it. But Richard Carrier, and a couple of others who've claimed that Jesus didn't even exist, or that he was just myth, or that he is a composite of a number of legends. No, we have evidence from hostile support that Jesus did exist. Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny the Younger, the Talmud, Marbar Serapion, Suetonius, Thales, Phlegon, and Lucian. These are ancient supporters that Jesus existed, even though they didn't believe themselves in Christianity. Celsus says that the claims were that he was born of a virgin. Celsus also said that he lived in Egypt at one point. Remember, out of Egypt I called my son. Jesus, if you look at the accounts in Luke and Matthew, and of course, first read Luke and then read Matthew for the birth accounts, because if you read them in order, you can see the exact order at which this all occurred. But Jesus went into Egypt. His family went into Egypt because they knew that King Herod was going to kill the firstborn who were under 2. So before Jesus had turned 2 years old, he and his family had fled to Egypt. His brother was James. Yeah, Josephus said that. In fact, Josephus detailed what happened to James, that James had been martyred for his beliefs. James was preaching at the Jerusalem temple where Josephus resided. And so James was martyred, and he was one of Christian martyrs who had initially tried to stop Jesus's ministry. He and his brothers and mother had thought that Jesus had gone mad at one point. They showed up and they tried to stop him. And Jesus said, "Who is my brothers? Who is my mother?" He said, "Anyone who believes is part of his family." And of course, Jesus appeared to James, as noted in 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15, as many even atheist and agnostic scholars have admitted, is a very early Christian creed that told us whom Jesus appeared to. So take a look at 1 Corinthians 15 if you haven't yet. But he appeared to his brother James, and James spent decades worshiping him and preaching for Jesus as divine in the temple. James was uniquely positioned to know whether or not Jesus had committed sins. We don't know about Jesus' early life, but James certainly did. The Talmud, Celsus, and Josephus all support Jesus' miracles. The Talmud says he was a sorcerer. Celsus said he had miraculous powers, and Josephus said he was a wonder worker. Josephus also said he was wise. He was a wise king and teacher, according to Marabar Serapion. He had knowledge of the future, according to Phlegon. Now, you can't have knowledge of the future if you don't have some sort of a divine spark within you. You don't have a divine divinity within you. You can't possibly know the future. His followers considered themselves brothers, according to Lucian. He claimed to be God, according to Celsus. He was worshipped as a god by followers, according to Lucian, Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger also said he was worshipped on a fixed day of the week. Now, interestingly, initially, Jews practiced the Sabbath, and all Jews still do. Jews for Judaism practice the Sabbath on Saturday. However, Christians moved that day to Sunday, thanks to Jesus' resurrection, which occurred on a Sunday morning. So our day of worship has been Sunday since the early times. Josephus, Tacitus, Lucian, Celsus, the Talmud, and Marabar Serapion said he was crucified and executed. Executed and crucified. So if anyone says that that didn't occur, and those include the Muslims. Muslims say, according to their very obscure script in the Quran, that God took Jesus up to heaven prior to the crucifixion. So some Muslims claim that some other guy apparently didn't claim that he was being irrationally or wrongly persecuted. Some other guy must have been crucified in Jesus' place, which is rather absurd. But of course, that was written 6 centuries after the crucifixion actually occurred. So who can hold that to be true? The Talmud says that he died on the eve of the Passover. The Talmud is, of course, a Jewish text. Phlegon and Thales said earthquakes accompanied the death. Interestingly, we can go right now and take a look at earthquakes in the year 33. We believe that Jesus died on April 3rd of 33. That's a Friday during the Passover week. We believe that occurred. And thankfully and geologically, I can find today in numerous academic journals support for earthquakes that occurred in the year 33, right around the place where Jesus was crucified. Okay, you can see in the Dead Sea Basin, lots of evidence of what they call seismites. Take a look, you'll be excited. He also was buried in a tomb according to Jewish customs and laws to keep the ground pure. They took him off the cross because they wanted to keep the ground pure. That was something that Jews did. They were commanded to do that under Deuteronomy 21. Jews even buried bad guys, the malefactors, according to Josephus and Tacitus. The disciples said he appeared to them alive 3 days after the crucifixion. Christians were martyred, according to Suetonius and Tacitus, after Jesus. And then Christians who refused to recant were martyred, according to Pliny the Younger and Trajan. His followers made an oath not to commit wicked deeds. Now, you look at this and you tell me what the best explanation is. Just throw it out there. I'm looking at the chat right now. I want to see if you guys can tell me anything else besides Jesus' resurrection that explains all of this information. Throw out a theory. Let me see if anyone does. And I say hi to people while I'm looking at this. Jen with 1 N. I haven't seen her in a while. Gary Priestley, Charlie Reed, Blaster Master 80, Dr. Nose. Dr. Nose got a wrench. So good to see all of you. It's a long time no see in a couple of cases there. So I hope everybody's doing well. Hope this video is finding you well on this balmy August day. Right now, my household is sleeping, sadly. I have to say it's 12:40 and we've decided to let everybody sleep in. And so, so I figured, why not make a video on some false atheist notions? And so I still haven't seen, is anyone going to throw it out there on what this could be as far as a best explanation? We're going to use abductive reasoning here. So abductive reasoning says you're going to take a number of pieces of evidence and you're going to come up with the best explanation of that evidence. I'm not using other types of reason. Deductive reasoning says I'm going to look at generalization. I'm going to look at then derive a specific. Inductive reasoning says I'm going to go from the specifics to come up with a generalization, a general conclusion. Okay, so right now I'm looking at abductive. So let's look at, some people might say that, oh, and I also say hi to Taking Back Eden. He says, thank you, Dr. Estee. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to go to the next slide. These are the theories that people have come up with. Since no one in the chat is coming up with them, I will go ahead and come up with them. So theories to refute the resurrection. Some people claim that Jesus faked his death. They call that the swoon theory. However, we have exactly zero ancient evidence to support that. It fails to explain the apostles' change. Remember, the male apostles, aside from the women, and aside from John, the beloved apostle of Jesus, besides them, they were the ones who were waiting. The male apostles all went into hiding. Makes that really clear. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. They went into hiding. Then they came out and they preached for Jesus for decades, despite being stoned, jailed, beaten, bitten by snakes, persecuted, ended up crucified, ended up beheaded. Pretty awful things happened to these people. But they knew what they were saying was true. Some say, oh, he must have had a twin. Of course, there's absolutely no evidence for that. It's ridiculous. It's a faith-based assertion to claim he must have had a twin. He must have been buried in a mass grave. Of course, again, no ancient evidence. No ancient evidence. We've got plenty of evidence to support that he was buried in a grave. In fact, he was buried under Joseph of Arimathea's grave. We knew from the book of Isaiah that he was going to be buried in a rich man's grave. Joseph of Arimathea was a rich Pharisee. Little embarrassing that a Pharisee had to be the one to bury Jesus instead of his family and friends. However, that's what happened. That's the truth, and that's what was reported. It was reported in the 4 different Gospels, 4 different accounts that he was buried in a grave, in a tomb, an empty tomb, not in a mass grave. So it was put in the 4 accounts, he was put into a tomb. And it was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And the other thing that was reported in Acts, of course, by Luke, he reported that Paul said that, yes, he was buried in a sepulcher. Luke said that. Now, the assertion that the disciples stole the body, there's no body. Don't you think that the ancient Jews and Romans would have done everything they could to try to find a body? Of course they did. They thought it was a disruptive religion. The way was disrupting everything. And of course, they didn't find the body. How about a mass hallucination? Everybody must have had a mass hallucination. They shared a hallucination in seeing Jesus over this 40-day period. Right. You don't share hallucinations just like you don't share dreams. Hallucinations are in the mind. This is something that's non-scientific. You can't posit that. The disciples conspired. Right. People don't risk their lives for decades for a lie. They were uniquely positioned to know the truth. There's no reason. People do things for sex, money, fame, fortune. Of course, the apostles had none of that. They had no reason to conspire. They doubted Jesus in the first place. It wasn't until he appeared to them that they went out and decided to preach for him for decades, despite all those massive persecutions. And of course, the final one, miracles are impossible. This stems from people like David Hume. Well, guess what? I just gave you evidence earlier of some miracles today. We have plenty of evidence in the Bible, and the best miracle ever of Jesus resurrecting from the dead. Pretty amazing. So let me just come back to the chat again. Again, I want to say, no, Jen, I'm sorry, you're going to have to look this up, but hallucinations are not something that multiple people can share. Just look up the definition, look up what the psychology people say, take a look, and you will find that that is something that's just simply not true. And so I'm going to get back to the other file that I had. So here we go. So the other thing, let's see, life can be explained materially. That's what we saw earlier with Richard Dawkins. Of course, life can't be explained materially because you can't explain the fact that a painting goes beyond the material value. Valuation of a painting is based on people's assessment of the painting, and the assessment is not something that's material. Just like valuation of a table is based on our use of the table. And of course, that can't be grounded down to just its material components. We also know that spirituality cannot be explained materially. Our consciousness cannot be explained materially. The fact that we have minds and minds over matter, that can't be explained materially. Many things in our life. The fact that we're hardwired to seek purpose and meaning, that cannot be explained materially. The fact that we seek God, the fact that we're hardwired to seek God. I've made numerous videos and blogs about scientific studies that have shown that even from very young ages, we are hardwired to seek God. We are hardwired to seek a divine authority in many ways. Of course, that's something that God's put within us, and that cannot be explained materially. Some people say, well, it's an evil world. I'm in pain. There's a problem of pain. Therefore, there must not be a benevolent God, or there must not be a God. Well, you're assuming that God is going to give us some sort of a cushy existence. And that's not something that God ever promised to us. Jesus said, this world you will face trouble, but be okay. Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. He didn't say, in this world, you're going to face bonbons and I'm going to make it really easy for you. He didn't say that to anybody. He's a very tough Lord. He told us we're going to have to overcome challenges, and that's how we become better spiritually. Now, some might say, well, life isn't fair. Why am I given more challenges than others? Why is my position worse than others? Well, you don't know. God gave us varying types of challenges depending on what sort of spiritual blessings we need or what sort of spiritual advancement we need. There's certain parts of you that need to be fixed. There are certain parts of all of us that need to be fixed. And God puts us in the perfect circumstances to make sure that we're given the opportunity to remedy those spiritual errors that we have. And so that's one of the reasons why we know that the evil world helps explain the fact that we're actually in a world where we can derive that there is evil. As C.S. Lewis said, how would I know that there's some sort of sense of justice if I didn't have this sense of what's good and what's evil? You don't derive a sense of what's good and what's evil without some sort of a sense of justice. And you don't derive a sense of justice in a merely material world. Our material world does not explain the fact that we seek justice and we demand our fellow humans be just. It doesn't explain that at all. It doesn't explain our universal, moral, objective laws and duties. It doesn't explain it. Now, I've gone into the idea of God answering prayers. I talked about the Templeton study before and the flaws inherent in that study. And so if you're somebody who's questioning God and you're wondering, hey, you say, hey, it didn't seem like he answered my prayers. He answers all prayers, but it just might not be in the way that you expect. It took me over a decade of praying to finally feel like I got the answer on what the truth is. And then the final thing is this idea that we're not better than animals. We're apes. We're just advanced apes. We have no purpose, no meaning, and life is just pitiless indifference. You don't live like that. Let's be honest. Not a single person in this chat lives like that. Not a single person listening to this video lives like that. People who live like that end up killing themselves. And I know that all of you are beyond that. You can't live like that. This is a nihilistic position, and it's not a position that can help for humanity's survival. But beyond that, you have a sense of purpose yourself. I know this from teaching business. When I teach students, one of the things that I've found in the studies of businesses and the treatment of employees is that when employees are given a higher sense of purpose in an organization, they perform much better. When they feel like they're doing something for the greater good, they perform much better. When they feel like there's meaning in their job, they're much more satisfied. They're much happier, and they're much more likely to be highly engaged. And so purpose and meaning is important all throughout your life. And that is something that God has given us. We all have a greater purpose, and we should seek that. And we've all been given certain spiritual gifts that we need to capitalize on to make ourselves better. Some people might say, hey, how come Elon Musk has so much more money, or he has more gifts, or he has more of this or more of that? Money doesn't spell the kind of spiritual gifts that you should really care about in the first place. It's material. As Jesus said, it's easier to get a camel through a needle than a rich man into heaven. So we want to be sure to remember something else that he said. Some of the last will be first, some of the first will be last. And he also said that he also gave us the idea of the parable of the minas. The very first servant was given 5 talents. The second one was given 2, and the third one was given 1 talent. Okay, the first one doubled the talents through investments and hard work. Second one doubled the talents through investments and hard work. The third one buried the talents. Okay, so what did the master do? The master congratulated the first 2. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've done great with little. I will make you in charge of much. What did he do to the third servant? He scorned that person for bearing the talents and walking away. Don't be that person. Don't be the one who buries your own talents. Everybody has talents to capitalize on, and you know what those talents are because you know what you enjoy doing. Do you enjoy working with people? Do you enjoy writing, reading? Do you enjoy doing mathematical problems? Are you really good with putting together graphic design? Are you great with art? What are you good at? Whatever it is, capitalize on that. Move away from the stuff you hate doing. If you're in a job you hate, get away from it. You're not working towards your greater purpose if you're in some job you hate and you just can't stand going to work every day. That's not you. Get into something you really enjoy that also is going to be something that brings goodness to others and would glorify God in an abstract way, if not in a true way. And I say abstractly because you might not realize you're glorifying God by doing what you're doing. But in essence, if you're being helpful to your fellow humans, you're doing something within the kingdom that's positive. And so I want to go back. I'm going to come back to the chat and say hi to you guys. So I want to say hi to people who are in here. So thank you. It's nice to see you guys on a Monday. So Jamie Russell says, Nathan knows it. Taking back says the parables of Jesus. Yeah, we love the parables of Jesus. Jen with one N, do saving and putting away is bad. So investing is good, Jen, investing. So socking your talents into a hole is not good. As Jesus said, we all have this sense of light. We've all got light, and you don't bury your light under a bowl. So share your talent, share your goodness, let people know, let your light so shine. That's what he's saying. He's also saying to work hard, be a hard worker. Paul pointed that out as well, St. Paul. So Dr. Nose says, Blaster Master, I would treat that like I treat all other historical facts. What is the balance of the evidence and why? I don't have special standards for the Bible at all. Truth is truth. Yes, amen. Dr. Nose, very brilliant point on your part. Zhang Fukusheng says, speaking of money, become an atheist and save 10%. Yeah, in the book of Malachi, it actually calls on people to give a tenth of their money into the church. And so we are called to give money to the church and to greater causes. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the church, but it should go to greater causes. In other words, if you want to give 10% of your money to good charities, to good causes, to help other people, maybe to help an orphanage, or if you don't have the money, maybe 10% of your time, 10% of something that you have. So it could be giving of you to make the world a better place. So think about it. What is your greater purpose and your higher sense of meaning? So yeah, I missed a whole exchange, I guess. So yes, I probably did because I wasn't paying attention to the chat. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I saw some pretty great people in here just a little while ago. So I'm going to try to make more videos. If you would like to come on my channel or you have a suggestion for something that you would like either discussed, investigated, you would like a panel on it, you'd like to see Christians talk about it, you'd like to see me talk to an atheist about something, whatever it is, if you're into that and you're interested in conversation and you'd like to have a friendly chat, go ahead and email me. You can reach me at alwayslearning1225@gmail.com. You could comment on this channel, comment on this video if you want. And I hope that everyone's going to, yeah, so good. Zhang Fukusheng, happily contribute to secular charities. So a lot of people have contributed to the Atheist Experience secular charity, which is pretty intense. You can see that if you go to GuideStar, you can actually see their tax returns and you can see all the money that people have donated to this church. Atheist Experience. Okay, so thank you so much for coming in. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. Thank you. You guys have an awesome day. Bye-bye.